As ever, please do get in touch with us about all of the topics we're going to be discussing, including that apology to Nigel Farage. gbviews at gbnews.com or on Twitter at gbnews. Your views are already flooding in on that breaking news, but let's tell you about it in more detail. The CEO of NatWest has apologised to Nigel Farage for closing down his bank account. Let's have a look at what she said. So, Alison Rose, the chief executive, said in a letter, "I am writing to apologise for deeply inappropriate comments about yourself made in the now published papers for the Wealth Committee. I would like to make it clear that they do not reflect the view of the bank. I believe very strongly that freedom of expression and access to banking are fundamental to our society, and it is absolutely not our policy to exit a customer on the basis of legally held political and personal views." The bank has now offered alternative banking arrangements at NatWest. So there's quite a lot to go at here, but Daniel, let's bring you in to begin with. What is your reaction to this letter?
I think this makes it worse. Actually, it's not really an apology. It doesn't restore the situation. He's not being offered his account back. It says that these are the views of the bank, but they don't reflect the views of the bank. But she hasn't said what action is being taken to put that right, what action is being taken to train, if nothing else, the staff who got it so badly wrong. And she is hinting and pretending towards the end that it's because Nigel Farage was a politically exposed person under the money laundering regulations, which, of course, he wasn't, because that status ceases 12 months after you hold a political office, and it's at least 2 years, isn't it, since he was an MEP. He hasn't held a political office since. So the whole letter, in my view, it really just does show that Alison Rose, Dame Alison, is either very badly advised or she doesn't understand how bad this looks. This is not over for her. She hasn't also mentioned how confidential information about his account, about his status with the bank, appears to have reached the BBC.
Well, that's a key point, isn't it? And there is a question about whether the BBC should issue an apology to Nigel Farage over their false reporting. Well, what came to light, they reported that it was because that his bank account was closed because he didn't have sufficient funds. We now know from the published papers that it was due to his values not aligning with that of Coutts. Michael, what's your reaction to this? Do you think this apology is enough?
Well, I mean, the government have said they're going to introduce some regulations, which mean that people will have to get an explanation if they get their account cut, and they will have some recourse to appeal. That seems sensible to me. I'm not really sure what people want from Alison Rose. They want to sort of get on her knees and grovel for forgiveness.
Well, I mean, she took home £5.2 million last year. You would have thought that she'd be a bit more across what some of her staff are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to defend multi-millionaire bankers, I suppose. And I do think this has raised worrying... I think this is a worrying situation. I mean, I would say that it isn't just something that happens to right-wingers. So Palestine solidarity organisations, for example, are constantly really struggling to open bank accounts because you have exactly the same situation where bankers say, oh, they might be a bit too controversial to bank with us, let's just let them bank with someone else. And if they all say that, you end up being denied what is pretty much a basic right, which is to have a bank account.
Yeah, it is quite extraordinary how they came to close Nigel Farage's bank account and how they appear to have briefed the BBC in a completely different direction, covering their backs. What do you think this says about the state of these types of corporations in our country? They say very clearly that they have these values. This woman who heads up NatWest, which is the owner of Coutts Bank, talks about how the bank is active in the battle against climate change, that they are prominent in LGBTQ rights. They have all of this, what one could call woke projects going on, and they want to be seen as a force for good in the world. Do you think that's woke washing, Daniel?
I don't know what woke washing is. Let me start by agreeing with Michael. This is not just a problem for Nigel Farage or right-wingers. It's a problem for all sorts of organisations, including left-wing organisations and commercial organisations, legitimate companies engaged in things that aren't sufficiently woke to meet the criteria of the banks. And it's got to have a stop put to it. Woke washing, I mean, the truth is, I don't know what they're doing. I think they somehow, especially in our larger corporations, they've been gripped with the idea that their job is to peddle a political message rather than to offer better customer services, improve the profit margins of their businesses, keep branches open in the case of banks, or have any real community sense, which a branch closing programme is not consistent with. So I don't know where they think they've got this from, or why they think they're entitled to use companies that have been built up over so many years as a platform for doing this.
It is quite incredible because all of these banks, they sign up to diversity and inclusion, and they talk about how their work practices are inclusive and they like diversity and all these good things that sound very nice. But clearly, from this case and from others that we've seen, they're not very inclusive to those they happen to agree with or don't fit in with, whatever the trendy opinion is right now. We saw in the published papers that they were quoting Brexit. There were references to racist and xenophobic. There were references to hoaxes around Russia and all of this stuff that could be seen as controversial. I worry, and I think a lot of people at home worry, that it's not just about Coutts, it's not just about NatWest, but could it be that businesses up and down this country are taking decisions like this about their customer base?
I mean, it could be, and that's why we shouldn't have unrestrained corporate power and why you want proper government regulations in these sectors and these industries. I suppose there is a danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because lots of these policies will have, inclusion policies, and that's principally for the workers. So it's a large organisation, they've got lots of employees. It will be the case that I'm sure these organisations have policies about the inclusion of LGBT people or people from ethnic minorities.
Is it about that, or is it more about PR?
Well, it's probably a bit of both. I mean, you'd have to speak to the people that work for the industries. But I wouldn't say that this Nigel Farage story isn't a reason to say no company should have policies to try and end discrimination in the workplace. Now, the problem here isn't so much, I think, that Coutts has sort of taken a political position. It's more that they have, I think, contravened someone's rights, really, which is to have a bank account. I mean, Coutts obviously is a very specific type of bank account for very high-value individuals, so potentially it's slightly different to if you were just with Nationwide or HSBC or whatever. But I do think that is an issue. The other thing I would probably say we should be wary about is any idea that banks making ethical decisions about investments is necessarily bad. Now, what you have at the moment is you've got some banks who, because of campaigning from environmental groups, have said, we don't want to invest in new fossil fuel extraction, for example. I think that's important. I mean, they can easily say that's actually because of commercial decisions, because if regulations change in the future, then that could be a stranded asset. So basically what I'm saying, something wrong has happened here, regulation is needed, but the idea that banks should only, and any company should only try to maximise their profits, I think would be a mistake as well.
I don't think I said that, but the fact is we also expect banks and other companies to obey the law. And it is the law that you have to observe the Equality Act, whether you like it or not, but it is the law. So they have to be inclusive in their policies and their employment policies, and not discriminate against people who have protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And I'd expect that of NatWest. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. They should be doing it because they're required to by law. What we're doing here is going way beyond that and actually promoting campaigns that are strayed right into the political area. And they're doing this partly, they say, because they can attract young people to work for them that way. But I think they're deluding young people, because any young people brought into the workplace today who are told your company is going to survive because you've taken a stand on transphobia or whatever, well, is being misled. The company will survive if it is commercially viable, and that does, I'm afraid, mean making profits by satisfying your customers.
Yes, I think it is quite interesting how businesses try to entice young people with all of this stuff, but really a business exists to make a profit and employ people while doing so, and that is a good. That is a societal good. That is the good. But it's quite interesting, Daniel, in terms of whether Coutts has broken the sort of fair treatment of customers rules that the FCA sets out.
They've just arrived, those rules. They're brand new.
In terms of consumers are to be confident they are dealing with firms where the fair treatment of customers is central to the corporate culture. Clearly, Farage does not think he was treated fairly. There are many of these. Consumers are provided with clear information, are kept appropriately informed before, during and after the point of sale. Again, Farage believes he was not treated fairly. This bank could be in real trouble.
I think there are important regulatory issues. The trouble is that the Financial Conduct Authority is, in my view, a pretty useless regulator. Even though the City Minister, Andrew Griffiths, has written to them now, again, I think he wrote, maybe it was a different minister, has written to them saying, you need to look at this and pull your socks up. They've been asked to do a review. It's in law now that they have to do a review of how politically exposed persons are dealt with, which, as I say, doesn't cover Nigel Farage, whatever Alison Rose tries to say. And she says she welcomes that review. But the fact is that this is happening, this sort of thing is happening to politicians, judges, diplomats and their families throughout the country, and they're quietly putting up with it. And we really, in a sense, should be grateful to Nigel Farage for exploding the whole issue and getting this coverage, because it's not just him, it's ordinary, decent people with no particular money, pensioners, sons and daughters of politicians who are having accounts closed, having credit cards taken away from them, because these rules are being misapplied, overzealously applied by banks, who have in many cases outsourced them to agencies who are basically paid to close the accounts down.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Annette's just written in, Michael, she says, the apology from Alison Rose is not enough. I worked for a bank for many years. Had I disclosed confidential information about a customer's account, I would have been instantly dismissed. She should go. I believe this refers to the, rumour, perhaps, that she herself may have briefed a BBC journalist at a charity dinner at one of these very cosy events and said, oh, no, the reason we closed Nigel Farage's account is simply because, the finances weren't up to scratch. Later, we find out, that's not exactly the case at all. Do you think this highlights, again, just how cosy some of our media is with the likes of big bank bosses?
We've known that for a long time. I think also this is an example of journalists shouldn't just take people at their word. Now, I think when this story first broke, I was very much of the opinion that people shouldn't take Nigel Farage at his word in that video. I still don't think we should. We should wait for the evidence to come out. I think what happened with the BBC is it seems like they took the word of someone. I don't want to sort of imply who told the BBC, but whoever told the BBC that this was purely because his money had fallen below the financial threshold, that was misleading and probably was confidential information. So I would imagine that they need to do something about that. I suppose going back to the previous point...
It's not mentioned in the letter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think going back to the previous point about this in part being because banks want to employ young graduates, I think that is true, but I don't think that should be dismissed. It seems like you both are saying they shouldn't bother trying to please their new staff, their young graduates.
I just think it's totally phony. It's like I sign up to a business. Oh, great, what do I get? I get a bit of unconscious bias training. I get, I feel good about myself because we celebrate Pride in the canteen. OK, the company says that they're, investing in these sustainable projects, but really what they care about is their bottom line. I mean, there are fantastic businesses that do have a lot of value to the world in terms of sustainability, or whether it's green technology or whatever. But it's a lot of the time it's surface deep with these corporations, is it not?
Yeah, I think absolutely they're just there to get their bottom line, essentially. But it's interesting what pressures they have to respond to. So I think what you will see in our society at the moment is the people who have the most disposable income tend to be much older. The people who companies really want to employ tend to be much younger. So what you will see is older people try and use their consumer power to change the practices of corporations, and younger people use their power as workers to try and change the practices of corporations. Now, that to me seems perfectly natural, and we shouldn't be legislating or judging too harshly any organisation which responds to either of those pressures.
So, what do you think Nigel should do next? He's on at 7 o'clock, for those watching at home. What does he do next?
I wouldn't advise him what to do.
He knows what to do.
But I think my personal view is he should hold out for a restoration of his accounts. And that's not, it seems to me, to be being offered to him. And the letter is ambivalent because I understand, only from what he says, that he had both personal and business accounts, and that the offer of a NatWest account was only for personal use. Now, I don't know what this letter means. I don't know the facts behind that. But I think he needs to be arguing to get back to where he was before, and the bank owes him that.
Yes, it's quite incredible that they just say, we're going to keep our offer of an alternative account with NatWest. Well, that wasn't the product he originally had and has been banking with for many, many years. Well, thank you very much indeed to you both. Now,